October 17, 1945, 6:28 a.m. The fog hadn't yet lifted from the rail yards at Metzingen when Elise Hartman pressed her gloved hand to the cold steel bench beneath her. The old wooden station clock ticked above her, stubborn and cracked, its second hand twitching like a tired heart. Train 2414 from Stuttgart was scheduled to arrive in 12 minutes. She already knew it wouldn't be on time. The air smelled of ash and coal and frost, the bitter perfume of a country not yet healed. She sat alone, as she always did. The fabric of her coat had begun to fray at the cuffs. Her boots, once polished to mirror shine when she wore them to meet her fiancé the first time, were now dulled and scuffed. In her lap she held a folded letter, not the original but a copy, creased 100 times, smoothed again by fingers that refused to forget. It was the last thing she'd ever received from him. Elise, if the world holds, I'll be home before the pears are ripe. Yours always, Friedrich. The letter was dated June 2nd, 1944. The pears had come and gone, twice. And still she came. Each morning, same bench, same time, waiting, watching. Most people in Metzingen had stopped looking at her. Those who once pitied her had turned to polite indifference. A few scoffed. Some whispered, "That poor girl, still waiting." But they didn't understand. She wasn't waiting out of delusion. She was waiting because the moment she stopped, he would be truly gone. And Elise Hartman was not ready to bury him. Not yet. The first screech of steel reached her ears through the fog, distant, echoing, mournful. It wasn't the 2414. It was a freight engine lumbering southbound toward Reutlingen. The rhythm of it, slow, labored, reminded her of a heartbeat on its last legs. For a moment she could see Friedrich again, not in the uniform, not in the boots, but as he was the last time they danced. His hands had smelled of motor oil and dried tobacco, his laugh too loud for the cafe, his hair always needing a comb. He had whispered that he'd come back a hero. She hadn't cared whether he did or not. She only wanted him back at all. April 10th, 1943. That was the day he boarded the train east. She remembered the weight of his duffel, the clink of his canteen, the tight way he gripped her hand like he knew, truly knew, that the world would crack open between them. The train had pulled away slowly, almost cruelly, dragging him out of the frame of her world inch by inch until only smoke remained. She hadn't cried until hours later, and even then not because he left, but because she knew, something in her knew, he might not return the same. Back in the present, the bench creaked beneath her. A soft voice broke the quiet. "Young lady, it's cold. You'll catch your death." It was Frau Klein, the baker's wife, shuffling down the platform with a basket of hard rolls and last night's unsold rye. Her smile was tired but kind. Elise nodded politely, tucking her hands deeper into her coat. "I'm all right," she said, though her fingertips disagreed. Frau Klein offered her a roll. Elise declined. Behind her, the sound of hammering echoed from the freight depot. Reconstruction crews were rebuilding the eastern cargo ramp, one of the last pieces destroyed by Allied bombing in late '44. The town was moving on, everyone was. Except her. There were rumors. A prisoner list released in Stuttgart in July had mentioned a Friedrich H. scene in a Russian camp near Tambov. But then again, that list had also listed a dozen men who were later confirmed dead. The Red Cross said they were still verifying names. The War Office said nothing. And so Elise came, every morning. The station master had stopped asking why months ago. One morning in February, the snow had piled so high the trains didn't run for 3 days. Elise still came. She stood beneath the awning wrapped in 2 coats, boots sinking into the snowdrifts, eyes fixed on the track. She told no one why. But that morning, a man in a patched uniform stepped off a cargo train, ragged, half-starved, missing 3 fingers. He had come from the east, from a camp, from a place with no name. Elise rushed forward, heart sprinting, legs numb, only to see the man turn, reveal a face she didn't know. Not Friedrich. Not this time. He told her there were thousands still unaccounted for, said some were coming home slowly, through Poland, through Hungary, that the rail maps were all wrong now. She thanked him, then sat back down. In June, a new soldier returned. He'd been gone since 1942. His wife had remarried in 44, thinking him dead. He stood alone on the platform with a satchel and no place to go. Elise didn't look at him. She didn't want to see what coming home without love looked like. On October 29, 1945, someone finally asked, "Why do you do it? Why do you still come?" It was a boy, no older than 17, sitting on the bench beside her with a bag of candied almonds. Elise stared down the track. "Because one day," she said quietly, "if he steps off that train and I'm not here, I'll never forgive myself." The boy didn't laugh, didn't mock her. He just offered her an almond. She took it. The war had ended. The world had tilted and cracked and realigned into something unrecognizable. Flags changed. Cities crumbled. Nations shivered under new masters. But the train still came at 6:40, late always. And she waited. That was what she had. Not faith, not hope. Just time. And a bench. And the possibility that something might still come down that track. On November 14th, a train arrived from Stuttgart with 2 coaches of returning soldiers. Elise didn't breathe. The men stepped off one by one. Some walked with crutches, some leaned on each other. One man was blind. She looked at each face, each set of shoulders, each shape of a mouth. None of them were his. Still, she stayed on the bench. The station emptied. She sat alone again. But she knew, if she came tomorrow, she'd still be on time. Because Friedrich had once told her, the only thing that matters is that you're there. If I see you, I'll know I've made it home. The first winter after the war came colder than any Elise could remember. Snow piled along the narrow alleys of Metzingen until chimneys puffed smoke like ghost signals across the rooftops. Blackout curtains, once required, now hung out of habit. Power flickered some days, water pipes burst on others. But even as the town stitched itself back together, not everyone believed it was over. In the butcher's shop, men still whispered about the Soviets in Berlin. At the baker's, old women muttered that the Americans would never leave. And at the train station, Elise still sat on the bench with her hands folded in her lap, her eyes locked on the horizon beyond the rails. It had been 561 mornings. The same bench. The same folded coat. The same letter in her pocket. The letter had lost most of its ink now. Water spots blurred the edges. She knew the words by heart. The parchment meant nothing anymore, only the memory it carried. Each day she looked, each day he didn't come. On Christmas Eve, a soldier returned. He was missing one arm and most of his hearing, but he staggered off the 3:22 from Stuttgart with a face full of joy. His wife screamed the moment she saw him. They collapsed together in the snow, sobbing into each other's coats. Elise watched without moving. Her hands trembled inside her gloves. The conductor stepped down from the train with a clipboard and glanced her way, offering a tight smile. He'd seen her 100 times. She gave him a nod. No words. He checked his list, shook his head slightly, then walked on. She didn't ask. January came with ice storms. The station roof creaked under snow weight, and several benches were removed after frost split their legs. But Elise remained. The station master had offered her coffee once, awkwardly, like a child giving a gift to a ghost. She had accepted it. They hadn't spoken since. One morning, a boy in patched trousers and a wool cap asked if she was homeless. When she told him no, he blinked. "Then why do you wait here?" She thought for a moment before answering. "I'm not waiting here," she said. "I'm waiting for someone." He didn't understand, but nodded anyway and offered her a piece of hard candy. By February, the post-war notices started appearing on walls again. German POWs held in Russia may not be returned until spring. Family members urged to submit missing persons forms to the International Committee of the Red Cross. Repatriation routes being established through Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Austria. Most were just words, but Elise read every one. She walked to the mayor's office and filled out the form again. Name, Friedrich Matthias Adler. Rank, Unteroffizier. Last known location, Volgograd, presumed captured. She left the rest blank. They asked if she had a recent photograph. She handed over the one from 1942, the one he gave her before he boarded the train. He was smiling, eyes sharp, hair slicked back with pomade. They made a copy and handed it back. "We'll notify you if anything comes in." They never did. Spring brought rumors. A man returned from a POW camp in Ukraine. Said there were still Germans in the East, many alive. Said some were too sick to travel. Some were being used for labor. Some had forgotten what their own language sounded like. Elise listened in silence, then returned to the station the next morning. And the next. And the next. One morning in May, a stranger sat on the bench beside her. He wore a long black coat and smelled faintly of kerosene and hay. His face was narrow, his eyes blue but heavy with something deeper. He didn't speak at first, just sat watching the rails, then. "Who are you waiting for?" She turned to him slowly. "Someone." "A husband?" "No, a fiancé." The man nodded. "What's his name?" "Friedrich." He paused. "Adler." Her breath caught in her throat. She turned, heart thudding. "You know him." "I knew of him," the man said, his eyes fixed on the platform. "He was in the 71st Division, Eastern Front. We were in the same regiment until Stalingrad." Her voice came out thinner than she expected. He made it out. The man didn't answer right away. Then he shook his head. "We were overrun. Some tried to surrender. Most didn't make it, but there were rumors. A few were taken, hauled into trucks, sent east." "Did you see him?" "No." "Then you don't know." The man looked at her, and for a moment something passed between them, grief maybe, or stubbornness, or the need to believe in miracles. He rose and adjusted his coat. "I hope he finds you." "I know he will." He didn't smile, but he touched the brim of his cap before walking away. She never saw him again. That summer, the benches at the station filled more often. Children played along the edge of the tracks. Young men carried radios and bread wrapped in newspaper. People were laughing again. But Elise remained unchanged. One day, a girl offered her a ribbon for her hair. Elise smiled, politely declined. Another day, the conductor stopped in front of her and said, "You know, if he were coming, he would have arrived by now." Elise said nothing. He leaned closer. "I'm not trying to be cruel, but you don't have to keep waiting. You're young. There's a whole world outside this platform." She looked him in the eye. "And if he steps off tomorrow and I'm not here?" The conductor sighed. "Then he'll understand, or he'll find someone to ask. Maybe he already has." Elise turned back to the tracks. "You've never been in love, have you?" The conductor opened his mouth, then shut it again. He walked on. The leaves turned gold. The war had been over for more than a year. Some families had begun receiving remains. Others were told their loved ones had died in Soviet camps. Many were told nothing at all. Elise stopped asking, but she did not stop coming. She had moved through something now, not grief, not mourning. It was something else, a kind of suspended certainty. It wasn't hope. Hope could die. It wasn't faith, faith could crack. It was simply the refusal to forget. She came each day not for Friedrich, not even for herself. She came because there was a bench and a train and a promise. And when a woman keeps a promise that long, she becomes part of the station itself. In October of 1946, she received a letter from the Red Cross. The envelope was thin. Her hands trembled opening it. Inside was a single sentence. Status unknown. Last confirmed record, Tamboff Camp, January 1945. She folded it in half, placed it in her coat pocket with the original letter, and went to the station. It was foggy that morning. The train was late. She waited. Winter returned with a quieter edge in 1946, the kind of cold that crept in slowly and lingered in the walls. Metzingen was no longer a town in mourning. It had learned how to walk again, slowly, like a child after a fall. Shop windows lit up in the evenings. The bakery on Gutenbergstrasse sold warm, sweet rolls again. Even the old cinema had reopened, playing French imports dubbed into stilted German. But the bench by the rails remained unchanged, and so did the woman on it. Some days Elise felt invisible. Others, like the whole world, revolved around her silence. Young couples passed her arm in arm. Soldiers who had returned months earlier walked by with tools and paper bags, but no one asked any more why she waited. That question had long since become impolite. The letter from the Red Cross sat quietly beneath her pillow. She hadn't reread it in weeks. What more could it say that she didn't already know? Friedrich had been in Tamboff, that was real. He had survived until January of 45. That was real too, but after that, nothing. No death confirmed, no witness accounts, no remains. So she returned each morning, sat with her hands in her lap, gloved or not, rain or snow. She had developed a ritual. She would arrive before the platform warmed in the sun, sit precisely on the left edge of the bench, cross her legs only if no one else sat nearby, and always, always, she would be gone by the time the 8:17 westbound pulled in. If he came, it would be on the early train. She was sure of that. In February, a man arrived claiming to be from Friedrich's regiment. Elise heard about him from the station master, who knocked gently on her door after sunset one night. She lit a candle, folded her coat around her shoulders, and followed him without speaking. The man waited in the office behind the ticket window, seated beside the coal stove, drinking thin broth from a chipped mug. He was older than she expected, gray in the beard, fingers gnarled, jacket worn thin. He stood when she entered. Elise Hartmann. She nodded. My name is Jakob Heller. I was with Friedrich at Stalingrad. The name alone almost broke her. She hadn't heard his name spoken aloud in nearly a year. Not like that, not by someone who said it from memory rather than sympathy. I remember him, Heller continued. He was fast, good with radios, kept the batteries dry with rags, always humming. He made people laugh. Elise blinked quickly. He wrote to me, right before they moved east, said they were being sent to a village near Kursk. Heller nodded slowly. We were there, then south, Volgograd, Tamboff. After that, we were captured in the snow. Her breath caught. Was he? I saw him, January. He had frostbite. They moved him to a medical tent. I never saw him again. She looked away. I'm sorry, he said. She shook her head. You don't know if he died. I don't, he admitted. But after that, no one I knew came back. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small rectangle wrapped in wax paper. Inside, a photograph. It was Friedrich, smiling, standing beside a wrecked radio antenna, his eyes squinting in the sun. I thought you should have this. She took it with both hands. Her knees nearly gave. He bowed slightly and left. She held the photo against her chest for the rest of the night. March came with bitter winds and short tempers. Food was scarce again. The Americans had sent rations in bulk, but distribution was slow and uneven. People muttered in queues. Black bread, potatoes, lard, always just enough to keep living. Elise added an hour to her wait at the station each morning, just in case. She started bringing a small satchel with her. Inside, a boiled egg, a tin of sardines, and a book of poems she hadn't been able to read. Sometimes she lent her seat to the elderly. Other times, she stood near the freight signs and watched the birds hop between the rails. The soldiers who returned now came by car or foot or military truck. The trains brought mail, grain, and crates of vodka for the occupation troops. Still she waited. One morning she found a girl sitting on her bench, barely 11, brown braids, yellow coat, bruised shoes. "Are you waiting for someone?" Elise asked. The girl nodded. "My father." "When did he leave?" "Before the war." Elise sat beside her without speaking. A few minutes passed. The girl turned. "And you?" "My fiancé." The girl tilted her head. "Does he know you wait for him?" Elise smiled faintly. "He does." The girl seemed to understand. The train that day brought wood for the Carpenters' Guild. And 2 coffins, wrapped in linen, sealed in oak. No names were spoken aloud, but the station master bowed as they passed. Elise remained seated. The girl squeezed her hand once, then left. April came with cherry blossoms. Metzingen's gardens bloomed early, as if eager to be beautiful again. Weddings returned to the registry office. Men trimmed hedges. Children flew paper kites stitched from ration wrappers and glue. Elise watched it all with a strange detachment, like looking through a window into someone else's world. The woman who used to cut her hair asked why she never laughed anymore. Elise said she forgot how. But she smiled when the pigeons landed too close to her boots, and she scolded the brat who tried to steal an old man's hat on the platform. She read the newspaper more often now, just the names. The lists. Each week new names. Found in camps. Found in Poland. Found in Hungary. Found in shallow graves. Friedrich Adler was not among them. She circled the list each time anyway, wrote his name below the columns. Just in case. In May she missed a day. Not from illness. Her neighbor collapsed in the stairwell. Elise spent the morning waiting with her for an ambulance. By the time she reached the station, the 6:40 had already passed. She stood on the empty platform in silence for a long time. It felt wrong, like she'd broken something sacred. But when she returned the next day, the station still stood. The bench was still there. And the train still came. She waited with less urgency now. Not because she had given up, but because she knew waiting could be done gently. With dignity. With silence. Even when no one was looking. The year 1947 slipped in quietly, like a stranger entering a room already full. By then, Elise no longer counted the days. She didn't need to. Her body had memorized the rhythm. Her feet carried her to the platform before she even registered that she'd left the apartment. Her fingers reached into the coat pocket where the letter rested, smooth and flattened, the ink long since faded to phantom script. She still rose before the first tram bell rang through the narrow streets of Metzingen. The city no longer stank of rubble and scorched brick. The markets had reopened. Clotheslines stretched between buildings. Children wore shoes again most of the time. The war lived only in scars, some buried deep, others worn openly on arms, legs, and faces. But in the train station it still lived fully. The cracked paint on the walls, the silence just after the whistle, the long shadows of uniformed men who never came back. And the woman on the bench, always alone. A young conductor with a crooked tooth and a bright scarf began nodding to her each morning. He didn't say anything, just a small tilt of the head as he passed. She nodded back. That was enough. Others had come and gone, clerks, station masters, newspaper boys with too much to shout and too little to say, but Elise remained. Her coat changed. The seasons changed. The world changed. She did not. In March, a man brought a small gramophone onto the platform. He sold songs on dusty records for 2 Reichsmarks each. Elise didn't buy one, but she listened. One morning he played a piece Friedrich once hummed, a waltz she couldn't name but knew by heart. She felt something rise in her throat, grief or memory or both, and she left the station early that day, walking all the way home with her gloved hand pressed against her chest, as if holding something broken together. She returned the next day, and every day after. In April she heard from her sister in Munich, a short letter, handwritten on salvaged stationery. They say some are still alive, but no one can prove it. How long will you wait, Elise? She didn't answer. There was no number she could give her sister that would satisfy, no story she could tell that would explain what the station had become. It wasn't about hope anymore, or grief. It was a vow. One day she returned home to find the apartment building unusually quiet. The stairwell echoed. The hallway lights flickered. In front of her door sat a basket of bread and a folded note. For the girl who still waits, from someone who once gave up too soon. There was no name. She brought the bread inside, lit a candle, and ate slowly in silence, staring at the window, half expecting someone to appear from the street below. That night she dreamed of Friedrich. Not in uniform, not bleeding, not vanishing into mist, but in a blue sweater with patched elbows, a toothpick in his mouth, and his hands warm around hers. He didn't speak. He just looked at her with the same expression he had the night they first danced in the square under string lights and cheap champagne. She woke with tears crusted in her lashes. She didn't tell anyone. Spring returned, and with it, the clamor of rebuilding. Someone painted a mural near the station, a bird carrying a bundle of wheat in its beak. Children gathered around to watch, asking the artist if the bird was flying home. He replied, no, he's carrying something back to someone who waited. Elise stood behind them and said nothing. In early May, she received a telegram. Another list released from the Russian ministry. See Red Cross office for confirmation. Her heart stuttered in her chest. She hadn't realized it still could. She went to the office in the afternoon, hands stiff with sweat, throat too dry to swallow. The clerk barely looked up. Name: Elise Hartman. The clerk rifled through the folder. Are you requesting a name or verifying one? Verifying. Name of the person: Friedrich Adler. A pause. Then a sigh. I'm sorry, nothing new. He's not listed. Elise's shoulders remained straight. Her eyes didn't blink. Thank you. She walked outside, found a bench in the sun, and sat until the light turned orange. That evening the train platform was empty, but she went anyway, just to sit, just to hear the whistle. The conductor with the crooked tooth approached her. I think of you every morning, he said. She looked up, startled. He rubbed the back of his neck. I don't mean that like a flirt. I think it matters, that someone's still looking. She gave him a gentle smile. I'm not looking anymore, she said. I'm remembering. But you still come. I gave my word. To him. She nodded. The conductor hesitated. Would you know him if he came? Yes. The certainty in her voice made him look away. In June, a man arrived from the east with a bag full of journals. He had been a clerk in Tambov camp. He'd copied names in ledgers by candlelight while frost grew on the inside of windows. His voice shook when he spoke. I wrote them all, he said. Every name I could remember. Most of them died, some were moved, others disappeared. He showed Elise a page, faded pencil scratches across lined paper. She found Friedrich's name, once, then never again. That proves nothing, she whispered. No, he said, it doesn't. She thanked him, then returned to her bench. In July, the heat was brutal. The stone platform radiated warmth long after sundown. The pigeons refused to perch. The paint on the freight doors bubbled. Still, Elise came. She brought an umbrella and sat in the shadow of the schedule board. She no longer felt foolish. Once, years ago, she had. Now the bench was hers. The tracks were hers. The waiting belonged to her, and she would carry it until it ended. One morning, a woman with 2 children sat beside her. Do you mind? Elise shook her head. They sat for 20 minutes. The children played with rocks, laughed, chased a butterfly into the grass. Then the mother said, My husband returned last year. He wasn't the same. Elise didn't answer. I'm not sure I waited for the right man, the woman said softly, but I waited. Elise turned to her. Then you did, she said. That August, Elise fell ill. The fever was sharp and sudden. A neighbor found her slumped in the stairwell, unconscious. The doctor told her she needed rest, no exposure, no early mornings in damp air. She listened for 3 days. On the 4th, she returned to the station, pale, wrapped in a scarf, slower now. She looked weaker, but she sat. That was all that mattered. In September, a boy no older than 10 approached her, holding a sketchbook. Are you her? He asked. Who? The lady who waits. She nodded. He showed her a pencil drawing, the station, the bench, and a woman with long dark hair holding a folded letter. It was rough, childish, but honest. I drew it in school, he said. Teacher said you're part of the town now. Elise touched the paper. You drew me too tall. He laughed. She kept the drawing. By October, she was nearing 30. Her birthday came and went without ceremony. She hadn't celebrated one since 1943. She lit a candle for herself, ate a single chocolate, and then walked to the station. It was raining, cold, heavy rain that soaked the bench and blurred the horizon. She stood beneath the awning, watching the rails disappear into mist. A man stepped off the train, thin, shoulders bent, a limp in his left leg. He turned, looked at her, hesitated. For a moment her heart stopped. Then he walked away. Not Friedrich. Not yet. But she would be there. Tomorrow. The town no longer noticed her. It wasn't cruelty, it was habit. The woman on the bench had become as permanent as the station itself. Her shape in winter, bundled and silent. Her stillness in summer, casting no judgment. The children who once asked questions now walked past her without comment. The conductors changed, the schedules changed. Even the wooden beams of the platform were replaced, but Elise remained. Not out of madness, not out of delusion, but because she had committed herself to a moment that had not yet arrived. And when a person holds still long enough for the world to move around her, that moment becomes a place. By early 1948, the rails no longer whispered of war. They whispered of commerce, of letters from Hamburg, of fruit from France, of coal shipments from the Ruhr. And they whispered still faintly of returning soldiers. One morning, a notice was tacked to the wall near the schedule board. Elise didn't read it until mid-afternoon, after the trains had thinned and the cold had set in around her knees. Prisoner returned schedule, Red Army transfers, March 12, 1948. Location, Stuttgart Main Rail Station, Track 7. Time, 08:00:10:30. Cohort Group T, Tambov and Kirov region camps. She folded the paper into her pocket without breathing. That night she lit 3 candles, not for ceremony, for clarity. She laid out Friedrich's letters, photographs, the one battered book of poems he'd marked with initials in the margins. Then she folded a clean handkerchief, packed it with the letters into a cloth pouch, and placed it beside her coat. The next morning, she didn't go to Metzingen station. She boarded the 6:30 to Stuttgart. It was the first time she had left the town in over a year. The platform at Stuttgart Hauptbahnhof was already crowded by the time she arrived. It was not like Metzingen's quiet bench and cracked tile. Here, the noise was thick, the smell of smoke and rust, the air alive with nervous energy, people shifting, clinging to photographs, reciting names under their breath. She stood among them, not moving, not speaking. The train pulled in at 8:16. Boxcars, not passenger cars. The doors opened slowly. One by one, men stepped down. Thin, hollow-eyed, some limping, some helped by others. Each wore the same expression, the dazed look of a man not yet certain he was truly free. A woman cried out, collapsed into her husband's arms. Another stood in disbelief as her brother called her name from the third car. Elise watched them all. One man exited, tall, dark-haired, his frame leaner than memory. Her heart leapt. He turned. It wasn't him. Another man stumbled. Not him. She stood unmoving as dozens passed. Some looked at her, some didn't. She did not blink, she did not speak, she did not cry. At 10:38 the last man stepped down. A Red Cross officer called names. None matched Friedrich. When the list ended, the crowd thinned. Families reunited or walked away in silence. Elise remained. An officer noticed. He approached, clipboard tucked under one arm. "Miss." She turned, her voice barely a whisper. "Was that all of Group T?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, I'm sorry." She nodded. "Was he confirmed in Tambov?" She didn't answer, just held out the letter. The officer read it, nodded again, then tucked it back into her hand like a priest replacing a relic. "There are still lists coming in," he offered. "Not all were transferred. Some were moved north, some to labor camps." She didn't react. "There's another group expected in July, smaller, just 20 or 30. She didn't ask for details. She simply said, "Thank you." Then walked to track 4, boarded the train to Metzingen, and returned home. She didn't go to the station the next day. Or the one after that. Her body had begun to betray her, the cold too sharp in her joints, the mornings harder to rise from. Her eyes stung when she read. Her hearing was soft on the left. But on the third day she returned. Her steps slower, her shoulders stooped. But she came. She sat on the bench like she always had. At 6:40 the train pulled in. She did not look up. When it departed, she remained for 10 more minutes. Then walked home. The station master's son, now 10, brought her a small box in April. Inside was a hand-carved wooden figure, a woman in a coat, sitting on a bench, her hands folded in her lap. He didn't say anything. She kissed the top of his head. On May 9th she fainted. The doctor came quickly, said it was her heart, nothing dangerous yet but not to be ignored. He told her she needed rest. "I rest every day," she told him. "No," he said gently, "you wait, that's not the same." She looked out the window, her voice quiet. "It's the only thing I know how to do." He left 3 bottles and a warning. She placed the bottles on her shelf and returned to the station the next morning. By June, she had begun to see things. Not ghosts, not hallucinations. Memories walking in daylight. She saw Friedrich standing near the corner post, grinning with a toothpick in his mouth. Saw him flick the coin she gave him the night before he left. Saw him wearing the blue sweater. Once she heard him hum. Not a song she knew, but one he'd made up, singing to her when she couldn't sleep in 1942. The notes came so clearly, she turned her head, expecting him to be beside her. He was. But she didn't cry. The memory wasn't pain, it was warmth. The day of the July return, she didn't go to Stuttgart. She stayed on the bench in Metzingen. She told no one. The paper printed the list the next week, 26 names. None were Friedrich. She circled the space where his name might have gone, folded it, placed it in her coat. By August, she no longer checked the schedule. She no longer expected anything. She came because that was what she did. It was a rhythm like breathing. She walked the same route, sat the same way, watched the same track. And in that stillness, in that endless repetition, something changed. She began to feel peace. Not the kind you seek, the kind you earn. The summer of 1948 passed like honey through a sieve, slowly, quietly, clinging to the corners of memory. In Metzingen, the days no longer followed the calendar. They followed Elise. At 6:30 a.m. she would step from her building with her walking stick, turning left at the bakery, past the post office, past the iron gate that always stuck, and onto the curved cobblestone slope that led to the station. She would nod to the station master if he was on duty, sit on the bench, breathe in the morning, and wait. People no longer asked who she was waiting for. The children who once whispered "ghost woman" beneath their breath now smiled and offered her gum. The older men tipped their hats. The women, many of whom had lost sons or brothers of their own, watched Elise not with pity, but with respect. Somewhere in the hush of her ritual, she had become something larger than one woman's grief. She had become an anchor, not to the past, but to what remained unbroken. A small thing, maybe, but in post-war Germany, even small things were precious. That September, an American officer passed through town. He had been stationed in Berlin since '46, now on assignment mapping out rural rail use in Baden-Württemberg. He wore a soft cap and carried a notebook with a dozen creased maps folded into its back cover. He watched Elise from the other end of the platform, watched how the townspeople greeted her, watched how she didn't flinch when the freight engine rolled in, watched how she never boarded. He asked the station master who she was. The man just said, "She's waiting for her husband." The officer nodded. What happened to him? The station master shrugged. Tomboff maybe could be dead, could be walking home still. The American said nothing, just looked toward the bench again, as Elise tucked a folded letter into her coat and stared down the tracks. That evening, the officer returned to Stuttgart, and the next day, without telling anyone, he sent a telegram to a contact in the Soviet repatriation office. The message was simple. German POW Friedrich Weber, born 1916, last letter from Tomboff Camp 1944, wife still waiting in Metzingen, any record. He didn't expect a response. Most such messages vanished into bureaucracy. But this one didn't. On October 3rd, Elise awoke in the dark. Her bones told her the air had shifted, not from cold but from change. The silence in her flat had weight to it. She brewed coffee, sat by the window, and watched the street lamps blink out as the sun nudged the edges of the sky. At 6:15, she began her walk. It was market day. The town buzzed faintly, fresh bread and fish in carts creaking over stone, but Elise moved through it like smoke, untouched, unseen. At 6:38 she reached the station. Her bench was empty, the tracks glinted, the air was crisp. She sat, smoothed her coat, pulled out a small tin and dabbed rosewater behind each ear. At 6:41 the morning freight rolled through, shrieking and groaning. She did not look up. At 6:46 silence returned. She stayed as always. But something felt different. The letter arrived 2 days later. It was from the U.S. consulate office in Berlin, typed, but with a signature scrawled in blue ink at the bottom. Elise read it once, then again. Then set it on the table. and stared at it for an hour. When she finally moved, it wasn't to cry. It was to gather things. The letter had confirmed only what it could, that a German soldier named Friedrich Weber had been held in a Soviet labor detail near Kirov, then transferred in 1945 to a forestry brigade west of Yaroslavl. He had been listed as unaccounted for since 1946. No confirmation of death, no confirmation of survival. A limbo of ink and stamps. But it also included something else. A copy of a Red Cross memo from late 1947. Letter intercepted en route to Metzingen. Sender, F. Weber. Contents withheld by Soviet authorities. Sender unconfirmed. That was all. No letter, no envelope. Just the knowledge that sometime in 1947, 3 years after the war had ended, Friedrich had written to her. And it had never arrived. For 3 days, Elise didn't go to the station. Not because she had given up, but because the waiting had transformed. It was no longer about belief. It was about decision. She spent the hours preparing, gathering everything she had, every letter, every photograph, every torn envelope. She took them to the parish priest, asked to borrow his typewriter. She began to draft. 1 letter to the Red Cross office in Geneva. 1 to the French occupation registry in Baden-Baden. 1 to the Soviet inquiry office in Potsdam. And 1 to Friedrich himself, not to be mailed but to be carried with her. She wrote, "If you are still alive, I am still here. I never left. I have waited each morning not because I was sure but because I refused to be unsure. If you return, I will be sitting where you last saw me." She folded it, sealed it, and placed it in her coat pocket. Then on the 4th day, she returned to the station. That winter came early, snow in November. But Elise never missed a day. Her boots wore thin, her gloves mended twice. The townspeople started bringing things, apples, wood for her stove, hand warmers wrapped in wool. She accepted them with quiet thanks. And every morning she sat. She had not aged so much as softened. Her spine curved a little more. Her hands trembled when she unfolded her coat, but her eyes, those never dimmed. Still sharp. Still waiting. The American officer returned in February. He had no new information, just a box. Inside was a tattered German Army ID book, a few photos, a letter never sent. All recovered from a Soviet record vault, now being declassified. He handed the box to Elise without a word. She did not open it until he left. Inside, she found the photograph she had sent Friedrich in 1942, creased, water-damaged but still clear. And one of him in uniform standing near a pine tree. The back read, Yaroslavl, August 1946. Then she found the letter. It was written in Friedrich's handwriting. Not elegant, not hurried. Just honest. My dearest Elise, they say we may be moved soon. I do not know where, or if I will be able to write again. But know this, I have carried your photo in my coat every day. I speak to it each morning as if it can answer. If you still wait, please do not stop. I will find my way home. It was dated December 12, 1946. She read it 10 times. Then folded it, tucked it in with the others, and returned to the station the next morning. It was March 22, 1949. The war had been over nearly 4 years. The station was quiet, light frost on the rails. The train pulled in late. Elise sat, hands folded. A man stepped off, then another, then 2 more. She didn't lift her eyes until someone said her name. Not shouted, not cried. Spoken. Softly, as if afraid it would break the world. Elise. She turned. And there he was. thin, wrinkled at the corners, hair grayer than she remembered. But his eyes, they hadn't changed. She didn't move, not yet. He stepped forward, slowly, as if unsure gravity would allow it. Then she rose. And the world, after years of motion, finally stood still. She didn't run to him. She walked. One step, then another. And when they met, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. The bench behind her was empty. For the first time in years. And for the last time in her life. She did not sit down. The sun broke across the rooftops of Metzingen like it had every morning for the past 1,000 days, golden, warm, and indifferent. But this morning it caught the world differently. The soft rays turned frost into glitter, made puddles shine like small mirrors. Somewhere beyond the church bells, the baker's door creaked open. Flour dusted the air. And on the far edge of the town square, a woman and a man stood still on the cobblestones, arms around each other. Elise Weber hadn't wept when she saw Friedrich, not truly. The tears had come, but they were not sobs, not breaking. They were a silent overflow like a tide returning after years of drought. His arms had been tentative at first, as though afraid she might vanish. Hers had been steady, real, there. She had not changed in the way grief usually reshaped people. She had not shrunk. She had become something else. The townspeople didn't come rushing. They stood at windows, behind curtains, pretending not to look. Everyone knew. And no one interrupted. Friedrich spoke first. Not in declarations or promises. Just a whisper. "Did you wait the whole time?" She had nodded once, then pressed her forehead to his chest. "I never left." They did not go home right away. They walked. The long way. Through the streets that still wore the scars of war, but also new signs of life. The bookstore had reopened. The apothecary had 2 new shelves. The post office had replaced the shattered glass with real windows again. Friedrich saw the world like a man learning a language he used to speak fluently but had forgotten. He kept touching things. Brick, railings, the wooden fence outside the grocer's, trees. He would trail his fingers over the bark as if testing whether it was real. Elise watched him closely. She did not pepper him with questions. She didn't need to. There would be time. Now finally there would be time. When they reached her apartment, still the same flat they had shared before the war, he hesitated at the door. The key was in her hand. She offered it to him. He didn't take it. "Elise," he said softly, "does it feel like I never came home?" She turned the key, opened the door, and stepped inside. "No," she said, "it feels like the world finally remembered something it forgot." The flat was small. 2 rooms, a stove, a wash basin. The wallpaper had faded, but the table was still theirs. The lamp still flickered twice before holding steady. Her coat hung on the same hook. A photo of them, one of the few they had from 1939, still sat beside the window, yellowing in its frame. Friedrich stood in the doorway for a long time. Then he crossed to the window and opened it. Cold air rushed in, crisp, alive. He turned around, sat slowly in the wooden chair, and exhaled. Elise boiled water. She moved around him without a sound. When she set the tea before him, he reached for her hand. His skin was rougher, scarred, a map of things she'd never seen. But he held her with the same pressure he always had, not tight, not timid, just present. "I had no idea," he whispered, "that you waited this whole time." She knelt beside him. "There wasn't a single morning," she said, "when I didn't believe you might come back." He looked down. "I almost didn't." That night he told her pieces of it. Not all, just the outlines. The Soviet camps, the marches, the frostbitten winter of 1946, where 6 men to a room took turns sleeping near a stove that never worked. The labor felling pine trees, building roads with their hands. The cholera outbreak. The whispers of men trying to escape and disappearing into forests they never emerged from. He told her of ration bread that was more sawdust than wheat, of a guard who once handed him an apple and was gone the next week. He spoke of singing. Quiet singing. Songs in German, in Russian, in Polish. Anything they remembered. Anything to feel human. They made us forget how to speak, he said, but they couldn't make us forget how to listen. She fed him soup and kept the windows closed until spring. The town adjusted to Friedrich the way it had to Elise's waiting, slowly, naturally. At first people stared. They whispered. A man back from Russia in 1949 was rare. Too many had disappeared. But Friedrich smiled. He helped the blacksmith with his wagon, helped carry water for the old woman who ran the laundry. When the mayor saw him sweeping snow from the church steps, he offered him a part-time job helping maintain the station. The irony was not lost on Elise. Friedrich now worked at the very place she had waited for him, sweeping the platform where she had sat, alone, for years. They never spoke of it. But one morning, when he passed her usual bench, he reached out and ran a finger across the wood. Then smiled to himself. By summer, he was rebuilding a bicycle. It was something to do with his hands. Elise watched him from the window. He'd stripped it to the frame, cleaning rust with a wire brush. She stepped outside and sat on the stoop. "You going somewhere?" she asked. He glanced up, grinning. "Only if you're riding with me." "I don't think I remember how," she said. He stood, lifted the frame, and wheeled it toward her. "Then we'll learn again." That Sunday, the two of them pedaled down the country road, Elise clinging to his back, laughing like it was 1938 again. For once, time bent the other way. But peace, even when earned, is not easy. Friedrich carried more than stories. Sometimes at night he would wake up gasping, his arms rigid, eyes wide. Elise never lit a lamp, never asked. She would place a hand on his chest, whisper his name. He would return. Other times she found him sitting at the table at 4 a.m., staring at nothing. She didn't try to pull him back. She just sat beside him and waited. Just like before. In October of 1950, Friedrich received a letter. It was from Berlin, a government archive confirming that he was now officially marked as returned from captivity. A bureaucratic victory, a checkbox. At the bottom, a typed line asked, "Please confirm if you wish to apply for reclassification as civilian status." He folded the paper, left it on the table. When Elise found it, she brought it to him. "Do you want to be civilian again?" she asked. Friedrich looked at her. "I never stopped being one." She nodded. But they both knew the truth. He had come home. But not all of him had made it. And that was okay. Because what had returned, what had survived, was enough. Winter came again. They lit the stove early, kept apples wrapped in cloth, and made soup from bones and carrots. One night snow fell so heavy the whole town vanished in white. Friedrich opened the window, held out his hand, caught a flake. He turned to Elise. "Do you remember the first snow we saw together?" She nodded. "You tried to catch it with your mouth." "I was 20. You were stupid." He laughed. A full laugh. The kind that shook his chest. She laughed too. And for a moment, the world was simple again. That spring, the station repainted its signs. The mayor commissioned a new bench to replace the one Elise had sat on all those years. The old one was brought to their home. Friedrich placed it in the garden. Not as a monument, just as a seat. Every morning they drank coffee there. Sometimes in silence. Sometimes with newspapers. and sometimes with stories, new ones they were finally allowed to write. Together, in 1951, the trains no longer ran on coal. The platforms buzzed with electric wires and post-war urgency. But the station still echoed in the early mornings with the sound of footsteps on stone and the dull, rhythmic clang of wheels slowing into place. Friedrich sometimes stood near the arrivals platform, leaning on the broom handle or adjusting a timetable pinned too high on the board. He wore a dark blue work coat, same as the others, but there was something different in the way he moved. He watched the passengers not like a man doing his job, but like someone counting tiny miracles. Every mother reuniting with her child, every old man welcomed by a niece, every soldier stepping off a train into civilian arms. He didn't speak of it, but Elise knew. The platform had become something sacred to him, not because of the war, but because it had been where time cracked, where she waited, and where he had returned. Every Wednesday, he brought Elise a flower. Not a bouquet, just one. Sometimes a daisy. Sometimes a wilted carnation bought for 30 pfennigs from the florist who smelled like pipe smoke and dust. Once, in late April, he brought her a tulip so bright it looked like a painted flame. He never explained why, and she never asked. But every Wednesday morning, without fail, there was a knock on the door and a flower in his hand. And always the same words, "Come walk with me." They grew older gently. The world did not. By 1953, television antennas began sprouting from rooftops like steel branches. Radios played American jazz. Teenagers started wearing leather jackets and sunglasses, mimicking stars from across the ocean. The war had turned into a story other people told. But in Metzingen, in the quiet house by the garden, time moved differently. Friedrich painted the bench. Elise took in sewing again, not for money, but to keep her hands busy. Her stitches became known around town. Wedding gowns, baptism dresses. Once, a boy asked her to repair a puppet his grandfather had carved. She spent 2 days threading new joints into its arms. In the evenings, Friedrich read to her. Old poetry, some Russian, though it made her wary. Not because of the language, but because of the shadow it cast. Still, she let him read it. It was his way of letting some part of the prison camp go. One autumn afternoon, the mayor visited. He brought tea and sat at their table like he had a burden in his coat pocket. "We're opening a new memorial," he said, "for the soldiers who never returned." Friedrich stiffened. The mayor continued, "But we also want to honor the ones who came home, quietly, without medals or parades." He pulled out a small envelope and slid it across the table. Inside was a bronze pin, a black cross edged in silver, flanked by 2 oak leaves. It bore no rank, no date. "Just a symbol," the mayor said, "for the waiting." He nodded toward Elise. "Yours too." She didn't take it. "Pins are for uniforms," she said quietly. "I wore faith, and I never took it off." Friedrich reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. "I'll wear it," he said, "if she doesn't have to." In 1957, the station modernized. The old bench was replaced again, this time with steel-backed seating bolted into concrete, the kind that didn't weather well but never needed paint. The old bench, Elise's bench, was offered back to them. They declined. Instead, they asked that it be moved to the back garden of the church, under the linden tree. "Somewhere quiet," Friedrich said, "but still part of the town." And there it remained. People sometimes sat on it after Sunday services. Few knew why it was there. But it never went unused. By 1961, their hair had silvered. Friedrich's hands had become stiff in the mornings. Elise's eyesight blurred when the light shifted too quickly, but neither of them ever stopped walking to the platform on Wednesdays. It had become their ritual, a kind of slow procession through town. People greeted them like clockwork. Children who once whispered about the woman at the station now helped carry her bags. And every week, without fail, he found her a flower. Once it was just a dandelion. She tucked it into her hair like it was made of gold. The last winter came quietly. A bitter cold arrived in November and never truly left. Pipes froze. Smoke hung low over rooftops. Friedrich slipped on the ice outside the bakery and bruised his hip. He laughed it off, but Elise saw him wince the next morning. That Wednesday, he didn't bring a flower. He brought a blanket. And the two of them sat on the old platform bench together, huddled close, watching trains come and go. He said very little. So did she. But just before noon, as the 11:52 from Stuttgart pulled in, Friedrich turned to her. "Elise," he said, "do you ever think about how close we came to never meeting again?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned her head against his shoulder. And in the hush of the train doors hissing open, she whispered, "I think about how lucky I was to have someone worth waiting for." Friedrich Weber died in his sleep 3 weeks later. No pain, no struggle, just a soft winter night and breath that never rose again. Elise found him before sunrise, his hand resting on the folded newspaper he'd been reading the night before, a bookmark from the station's lost and found tucked inside its pages. She did not cry at first. She cleaned the house, set a pot of water on the stove, folded his clothes. It was only when she opened the wardrobe to place his boots beneath it that she found the last flower. A single white tulip wrapped in wax paper, dated, labeled Wednesday. She sat down on the floor and wept. At his funeral, the station closed for 2 minutes. A whistle was blown not for departure, but for remembrance. And Elise walked the length of the platform once more, alone. But not empty. She continued her walks. Every Wednesday. Not because she believed he would return again, but because in her bones she knew he never truly left. Every time the wind blew through the wires. Every time the wheels groaned on steel. Every time a train door opened and someone stepped into someone else's arms. He was there. Just quieter now. In 1974, a journalist visited Metzingen for a feature about post-war memory in small towns. He found Elise in her garden, pruning roses. She was 59 then, her back a little bent, her hands still deft. When he asked about her husband, the man who'd returned from the East when so few had, she smiled. He was never lost, she said, just delayed. The journalist asked about the years she waited. How did you know he'd come back? She set the shears down and looked past the garden fence, toward the station she could no longer walk to. I didn't, she said. I hoped, and sometimes that's stronger than knowing. That same year, the church replaced the bench. The old one had rotted through. But they kept a slat from the backrest. A carpenter carved into it a single word. Warten. To wait. It hangs on the wall of the station to this day. No plaque, no story. Just a word. And a silence that carries more meaning than sound ever could.